Top 5 Herm Edwards replacements. Now, I've never seen, like, I try to go through and read what experts are saying and kind of aggregate my list. And 2 or 3 of these are kind of obvious right off the bat for me. But, going and seeing, like, what fits, what you do some research, who, has ties there or whatever. Well, because of Ray Anderson and his non-AED background, I've seen 10 articles, and while there's some obvious ones that overlap, it could not have been more different all over the place.
And he may not be the one who's hired.
Exactly. That's why I think it shouldn't be. Yeah. So number 5, from the assistant category, Jeff Grimes at Baylor. Look, was recruiting in the West at BYU. Running the wide zone might not be a bad idea to get them straight on offense and kind of recruit the guys that you need. I think that Jeff Grimes is not long for being an assistant coach, whether it's this year, next year, or soon. I think he's got head coach vibes all over him, and it wouldn't surprise me to see, especially if Baylor has another really good year on offense eventually, that his name comes up in a lot of searches, and Arizona State might be a good one for him.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder how much this year plays into kind of the feeling around him. I think if he was going to strike while the iron was hot, there wasn't a hotter time than last year, right as the season was wrapping up. But obviously there was already a lot of hires that were made and just a lot of big pieces that were moving that he didn't technically qualify for. But yeah, I mean, if you were to start a list at the beginning of the year, he'd be a guy that you'd certainly have circled as a guy to watch, a watch list type of ascension. So yeah, I could see him, taking this job. I think that's probably, they're not going to get like Brian Kelly or Lincoln Riley or anything like that. That's not happening. So it's going to have to be somebody probably like a Jeff Grimes or I'm sure, some of the others that you mentioned here.
Okay. Number 4, Bryan Harsin of Auburn. He's going to get fired there, we pretty much think, because of the way things work there and the fact that his AD's gone and everything's soured. We talked about that in the heat meter yesterday. But he was very successful at Boise State. The guy, he was successful where he's been. He's probably a head coach in college football, just not at Auburn. Arizona State is probably more in the Boise State ballpark than Auburn is. So I could see this working.
Yeah, it's interesting. It depends on how you have to sell it to your boosters and donors. And those are the ones that pay the money, right?
Yeah. What I would do, and I'm not trying to knock Auburn's boosters, if I was trying to sell it to them, be like, listen, those people are crazy.
No,
you're not crazy.
They are. And most of the people will know, and
Do you have to sell it to your boosters? You mean the reason why Bryan Harsin's in the situation that he's in? Yeah, I mean, there's probably something to do with boosters, at Auburn. Yeah, probably. Yeah. Considering that we've heard, plenty about that. But, yeah, I mean, going out closer to the West, I suppose, is, something that makes a lot of sense for him.
I wouldn't even say that. I would say that to a G5 to a Power 5 jump, Boise State to Arizona State makes more sense to me than Boise State to Auburn, who won a national championship in the last 15 years, and those people still think it's 1 year after that.
Yeah, I mean,
always will.
Yeah,
I do think though there is something to he coached on the West, out in the West, and that's what Arizona State is very much a part of right now until they leave the Pac-12. So I mean, he would have familiar recruiting territory and ties out there potentially, but yeah, I think it's probably more his speed than the speed of the SEC, so to speak, or at least the speed at Auburn.
He knows the land. He knows the land.
I'll throw another assistant out there. Young guy on the rise, Kasey Dunn, the offensive coordinator. He's a young-ish guy. But young guy on the rise, Kasey Dunn, the offensive coordinator at Oklahoma State, has moved that offense to a couple different phases and shows some adaptability. And he's going to get some looks. If they want to go this route, I think he could get much worse than Kasey Dunn. Done a good job to me. Done a really good job with Spencer Sanders, considering that he might still be a bit of a turnover machine, but he's a lot more fun to watch now and a lot more trustworthy, and that's on Kasey Dunn.
Playing with tremendous confidence right now.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen his name kind of pop up here and there. Certainly not one of the initial ones that come to mind, but I don't think the Arizona State job would necessarily will be somebody that automatically comes to mind. I mean, I'm really curious what they do and kind of who they target, because there's a lot of different directions this could go. The only direction it won't go is, again, to like a Lincoln Riley, Brian Kelly type of move, because only so many schools can pull that off. But yeah, they could go Kasey Dunn, they could go Bryan Harsin. I mean, it's really, anybody's best guess at this point. So, yeah, he's doing a good job so far. I mean, Spencer Sanders is a heck of a talent, and we'll see. It's still so early. But, yeah, so far, great marks for that offense.
Yeah. Number 2, Charles Huff for Marshall. If you're going to go the FBS route, here's a guy who is shooting up the charts, just had that big win over Notre Dame, and people think very, very highly of him and could come in and maybe create some juice in Phoenix, which I think that job is kind of a sleeping giant because it's in a great spot. It's a great campus. You can go to California, you can go to Texas, you can go to a lot of places and get recruits, and all you need is somebody to sell it, not to mention the fact that it's not exactly Stanford. I mean, so you don't have to, have a lot of – you can get guys in, and they can have productive careers. I don't know.
Marshall, it was something we didn't bring up. They lost to Bowling Green.
I was going to say, I mean, that would have been better probably a week ago because I think some of that air got let out of the tires when he turned right around and got beaten overtime by Bowling Green. But, I mean, yeah, he's a guy that you certainly have to at least think about. And, if you would have said his name a week ago, they'd have been like, oh, yeah, Charles Huff, the coach at Marshall. He's obviously got the Bama ties. So yeah, he's a good coach, but I do think a lot of the steam got let out after that follow-up loss.
I tossed up between him and Blake Anderson, but I ultimately went with him on this spot. At number 1, Todd Monken at Georgia. He's been a head coach before, did a good job at UAB, and has done a great job with the offense at Georgia. Would stand it to me that he's probably about to be a head coach again. He comes with national championship pedigree now, and if Arizona State wants to have that kind of credibility, go get a guy who's from the most recent national champion, or at least one of the two. We'll see what happens with Georgia this year, but. Again, that offense at Georgia's humming. He's made something really special out of Stetson Bennett. That he and Kirby Smart are recruiting really well on that side of the ball. So, heck.
Yeah, you go to coordinators at Auburn, at Georgia and Alabama, right? Yeah. That's where you go find them.
Yeah.
Bill O'Brien, and you almost
just
hear
had
his
a former
name.
NFL head coach.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. You normally hear him. You've heard, his name's going to be attached, but there's just something there that seems to be missing. Although he did a remarkable job at Penn State, was pretty good with the Texans, and eventually just the trades that they made were terrible.
Which is why when I see Matt Rule mentioned for jobs like this, he doesn't fit Arizona State to me. Nebraska, he fits. Arizona State, not to me.
No, I think he's going bigger and pursuing, like a Nebraska or, something else that might open up. I mean, I can't say that he said that, but that's what I presume. And I think that's what a lot of people presume is, he's far more likely for a Nebraska than he would be for an Arizona State. And, I don't think you're going back-to-back NFL head coaches when we've already done that, and there's a reason why you're moving on. Matt Rule's far more of a sure thing because he's, coached recently in college football and been successful. So I know he will be a hot name, but there's some others that were mentioned, I think, throughout, like Byron Leftwich I saw mentioned. Kalani Sitake, is a name that automatically pops up. I'm not sure if that he would leave BYU for Arizona State, but the one that I found the most interesting was Tom Herman. That's a name that I think is going to be really intriguing as the carousel gets underway with however many jobs open up. I mean, he's not in a position where he's like big dog in the NFL right now. I mean, he's ripe for coming back to college, and I think a lot of people now look at Texas and go, wait a second, did they kind of get rid of him too quickly? Like, did he actually do a good job and we just were really impatient? I know there were certain things that, there were other reasons than just win losses, but he wasn't awful at Texas by any stretch. And so, I think he's certainly a guy that will be interesting to see as well.
Also on the chat room mentioned Dan Mullen. I think Dan Mullen also, he's pretty good on television, by the way. I don't think Dan Mullen wants to recruit anymore. So I don't think, it's not just he doesn't want to recruit against Georgia anymore. I don't think he really wants to do that anymore because the game has changed. Mm-hmm. And I think if Dan Mullen gets back into coaching, he'll go be a QB coach and probably a damn good one in the NFL. But I don't think he wants to recruit anymore.
I did see him on TV. I didn't have the sound up, but I saw him. I didn't get a chance to listen to much of what he was saying. All right. Thank you. Jack is on his way to go cover other things as he does as far